Brookwood Farm is a working organic farm in the Blue Hills, and today you'll learn some little-known history of part of the park from an expert in preservation carpentry. I am Judy Lara Jacobs, the Executive Director of the Friends of the Blue Hills. You can introduce yourself.
I am Steve O'Shaughnessy, Department Head Preservation Carpentry at the North Bennett Street School in Boston.
That's great. So in January, we're going to start back with a Facebook Live regular video shows on Thursdays at noon. So if you want to learn about when we're going to be starting in January and get the weekly updates, just go to friendsofthebluehills.org/video, and those regular shows will be starting in January. So can you start out by giving us a little sense of just your background?
Sure. I've been teaching at North Bennett for 13 years, and I'm a trained preservation carpenter, a graduate of the very program that I now teach. So I started 20 some odd years ago going to North Bennett to learn the craft of working on old buildings, and now I find myself for 13 years, this is my 14th year starting of teaching, continuing on with the same training that I received and that I used for many years before turning around, coming back to the school and teaching.
That's great. So if any of you have questions about Brookwood Farm, just leave them in the comments and we'll try and get back to you during the live video or later in the comment section. So can you give us a sense of just the general history of the Brookwood Farm?
Well, I'm not an expert on this farm, but I've learned a lot in the 8 years we've been here. It's my understanding that this site, which is on the National Historic listing for its landscape, not for any of the buildings on this site, even though perhaps the one over my left shoulder should be. We'll talk about that in a minute, the English barn. But the landscape goes way back to indigenous Native Americans that used this glacial plain to farm. And then in the 17th century and 18th century, there are maps that show this landscape being farmed. And still, this 60-acre, roughly, farm, which is split between Milton and Canton, the town lines divide the property somewhat, is still used as a farm. It's a community farm, which I'm not personally involved in, but there is farming going on here, which is great that that tradition is going on. The reason I find myself here is working on the structures. We were brought on here about 8 years ago to look into the barn that we've now finished the restoration on, the English barn here. This barn was dated through dendrochronology to have been built in 1791. And our involvement was to document it, take it down, move it off the site, do a whole series of repairs, and then put the building back up. Well, we did all that with waves of students at North Bennett, work that was done here and off-site. When the parts and pieces were basically repaired or refabricated, we came back and we did a barn raising. The location where the barn is now is at least its third location in its history. It was moved about 1840 onto a site that now occupies a new structure. And you can turn it in that direction if you like. This looks like an American barn. It's red. It's tied into earlier buildings here, but it's brand new. And it, on the footprint of where this building sat, is where the English barn sat since about 1840. But we know it was moved because the foundation it was sitting on was later than the structure ended up being dated through dendrochronology. This is a late 18th century barn, and yet the foundation was slag from the Quincy quarries, which really came up in operation in the 1830s and 40s. So through double and triple checking with experts in the field and coming to the site and looking, everyone was in agreement that the barn had been moved on to this foundation. An American foundation which had an earthen ramp that went down under the barn, leaving about a 5-foot headroom. And that was never the case for the barn in 1791. It would have had a dry-laid stone foundation with field stone and no basement beneath. And so that's what we did. When we finished with the restoration and we were doing a barn raising, we decided to move it across the road and put it on a proper English foundation. It still has an earthen ramp going up to the main door. It's 10 foot high and 8 foot wide, but the fieldstone beneath is proper. And we also reduced it in size. That barn, when we first found it, was 30 feet wide. Now it's 20 feet wide. The additional 10 to 12 feet was a later addition, which was all pine and was in terrible condition. So DCR, Department of Conservation and Recreation, the ones who own this site and make all the decisions, agreed to let us bring it back to its original form, which is 20 feet 1 3/4 inches square. It is an exactly square building. And inside, and the barn was built basically to house hay and some kind of animals, either cows or oxen. That is also an agreement from the experts that I was able to bring on. That was the purpose of the barn. And in the 1840s, probably not a coincidence that it was moved at the time that this other structure at the road, at Blue Hill River Road here, was built. The main Cape Cod with the center chimney, which is the one with the access of the roof with the white painted ridge, that's the original building. That was built about 1840. So I speculate that there was a change of hands here. The property was sold to somebody who had some money, decided to build this Cape Cod, and move the little barn across the fields from which we may never know where it originally was located, but moving onto a new foundation and then added another 10 or 12 feet to make a proper 3-bay English barn, which is the way we found it, although in terrible condition. So the red house behind me, with the addition, that's the gabled addition that's coming towards us, which is new construction, done as a timber frame properly, identical in form of the frame of the Cape Cod, but newly built by students from North Bennett several years ago, is our latest project house. So I've talked a little bit about the English barn, but we've been done for a few years on that barn, and now we've turned our attention on the same property, which really works out well for us because we know and we love working here, is the Cape Cod. And we've been working on that building, I think, 4 years, off and on with waves of students doing everything from framing, sheathing, siding, trim, windows, doors, fabricating windows, restoring windows, and roofing. The latest major wave of work is the new red cedar shingled roof that is sitting up on double strapping. You can't see it, but under the shingles is layers of crisscross strapping, which allows air to circulate underneath to allow the shingles to last much longer than they would otherwise. The shingles will probably be easily able to last 50 years.
Wow.
Installed that way.
Yeah, no, that's great. I also just because do you want to tell us what the your students are working on now over there with all the noise?
Again, DCR has been such a great partner of North Bennett for years now, and it's just getting stronger and stronger. And they keep welcoming us back here to DCR to use the site for work that simply teaches lessons, not necessarily to further the cause of the restoration of their buildings, although we are still making progress in that regard. We also have to teach our students basic construction techniques. So we build sheds, and in the background are 2 sheds that I've split my newest class up with 10 on each shed, and we've built new construction sheds, both of which are sold. They are stick frames, modern construction, and the difference between them is just that one has a green Vermont slate roof with copper trimmings, copper flashing, and a custom-made white oak double door on the end. And the other one beyond it is a red cedar shake roof with double strapping, just like the Cape Cod I was describing a minute ago, just a miniature version. These are 10 by 12 sheds. Again, they're both sold. One of them is going to go to another partner organization, Historic Boston Incorporated, to their latest project in Mattapan as a garden shed, and the other one has been sold to a private party down in Brookwood. And we build them every year. We build a few sheds here, and they get carted off. They don't stay here on the site. We also build timber frames, small timber frames with post and beam, mortise and tenon joints pinned together, and usually we build the frames, and the frames get disassembled and move off of the site as well. So this is just a great location for us, close to Boston, close to the major highways, parking, access to other support buildings, and we have really enjoyed the hosting of DCR to allow us to come back and do this.
It's great. Well, thank you
so much. Thanks so much
You're welcome.
for talking to us today.
You're very welcome.
Do you have anything else that you want to think people would be interested to know?
Look up North Bennett, nbss.edu. You'll learn more about preservation carpentry and the 7 other full programs of traditional craft that are taught in Boston.
Great. Well, thanks so much for watching. And again, if you go to friendsofthebluehills.org/video, you can sign up to get notices about when we'll be starting in January for Blue Hills Alive, a weekly Facebook Live show about the Blue Hills. Thank you.